Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Maria Mishturska and you're watching As Is Art Series, where we talk with the artists, gallery owners, dealers, and overall art people about their art paths, the work behind the scene, their thoughts on the contemporary art market, and more. And today my guest is a fascinating artist from Los Angeles, Nicholas Biddle, who creates these nature-inspired sculptures following his grandparents' path, both of whom were artistic. So that's going to be very insightful and engaging conversation. But before we dive in, please click the like button, subscribe, and enjoy. Well, thank you so much for making a time for this little interview.
Yeah, thank you.
And I remember from your the written interview that you were referring to your grandparents by whom you were inspired to start your art path. And I was very curious about your art journey overall. So, I mean, I guess as you said, you were influenced as a kid, but was there this turning point in your, I don't know, childhood or teenage years where you're like, okay, this is what I want to do, I don't know, whether the rest of your
Uh,
life or
yeah, my grandmother was a writer, and she was a child actress. She sort of supported her family in New York. She was Russian, or Ukrainian, and they left when she was a baby for the States, and then she supported her family in the Yiddish theater in Brooklyn, and sort of, and then she went to writing and then worked for studios writing, and then she wrote for Hitchcock, and that's sort of how her and my grandfather met. My grandfather was born in Los Angeles in 1906, and so he went to architecture school at USC, and then there wasn't a lot of building being done because it was the recession, and so he walked into Universal and was like, I can draw, sets, and really helped build the back lot that we see today,
oh my.
um, and designing a lot of that. And then they sort of met because he was at Universal, and yeah, that's how they met. And I think there wasn't a lot of sort of oh, here's how you make art, here's what's good about art, but just their general sort of energy was artistic, and everything they did. My grandmother would sing and would create songs just about daily, so that, I think, just the mentality of that everyday life is art. Everything that you do can be artistic, doesn't matter what. um and then I mean, I was an athlete growing up. I didn't have a lot of I loved art. I loved going to see films, and going to museums, and uh, the Natural History Museum, and growing up going to studios and things like that, seeing people, and just LA in general is sort of a workers town. People come here to either build or to create. There's sort of this mentality. And then there's also the aerospace industry that's here. Um, and yeah, and then in high school, I sort of lost interest in athletics and got more interested in photography. My high school, I was lucky enough to that had a they had a photo lab. So um, yeah, I just started taking photos, and I became really interested in like architectural abstraction and light, and so I up applied to colleges for art, and
Oh,
then I got a good scholarship from Pratt, which is in Brooklyn. Um, and if you haven't been, I would recommend going to their campus. It's a one of the best sculpture gardens in the country.
wow. I had no idea. I mean, I've heard about Pratt, of course, but I didn't know that they have such a wonderful sculpture garden.
Yeah, their campus is really amazing, and they have a their library was built by Tiffany. It's basically an all glass um, library, and it's all Tiffany glass, and it's really you look down and you can see the level below you, and
Wow.
it's really beautiful. So I went to Pratt and for photography, um, which also Maplethorpe went there for photography, and there was a lot of great artists there that they aren't known for the photography. They're known for their architecture. So that school teaches a different method of art, which I really am thankful for. It's the Bauhaus method, which is you go there for your practice, but you have to be sufficient in all forms of art. So if you're in photography, you're going to be building and making molds and doing color theory,
Mm,
drawing, life drawing, and they want you to be a well-rounded artist. And I
mm,
think at the time I was kind of like, I just want to do photography.
mm.
But looking back, I think that shaped what I do now. After that, yeah, I didn't graduate. I left early and came back to Los Angeles. Um, and yeah, just started working. I worked a little bit for the Academy in their library, preparing uh, film artifacts for exhibits and things. Um, that was
So
a brief period, but yeah.
so mainly like you started with the photography, and then how did you, I mean, like I guess like it was like interest of yours. How did you find your medium, like the one that you're working on right now? Was it like at the school or after when you figured that that's something that like resonates with you?
It was a lot later. I didn't start, I mean, I remember I made a few pieces with plastic and mold making
Mm.
at school and using color and but then I didn't really go into that. I think the combination of wanting to create more abstract work with photographs sort of led to what I do now, which is I wanted to work with light and color, um, and I wanted to work with a medium that could capture both. And I think urethane and resin and plastics and pigments was sort of that um, that sort of created that idea for me. So I really got involved, interested in that, and then I started researching more like the light and space movement um, from Los Angeles, and uh, took a lot of influence from some of those artists.
Did you have like a favorite artist that like you would say you're mainly inspired by, like from like some of the living artists or perhaps the one who already like passed away?
Um, so I think when I started working with resin, I reached out to an amazing artist His name's Peter Alexander, and he allowed me to go to his studio and sort of showed me around and
Hmm.
showed me his mold making process, his equipment, and then I would have phone conversations with him about art and show him my new recent work. And so,
Wow.
and he passed a few years ago, but he definitely was an influence. Um, and there's a lot of great artists that came out of that generation, that worked with urethane. And I think it's because the aerospace industry was using a lot of materials here, like resins and urethanes, for weapons and for boats. And so a lot of that material was sort of passed down, um, to the film world, and then to sort of the art world. And then they just really took it and made their own sort of creations with it. And that sort of enabled everybody else to have access to it. Um, Experimentations, I don't think I would be able to do what I do today.
So what are material? Because I think from what you're describing now, I kind of got a better idea of like the materials that you use in your work. So are they from air industry, those like are the sculptures that you're creating, and like this metal pieces that implemented in some of your artworks, or what are those made of?
Those are urethane resins and pigment.
Hmm.
Um, and urethane is a two-part liquid, that when mixed together creates a solid, transparent, um, shape, and you mold it in silicone, or there's other materials that you can use to cast the liquid in. But it comes out like a syrup, and it hardens to a extremely rigid object. Um, and you know y- when you have it in light, it can refract just like glass. And so that really struck me as important in what I was trying to say and do.
And do you work on the multiple pieces at the time, or if you start, working on one, that's till you finish, you don't touch anything else?
I try. I mean, sometimes I have to work on a good amount of pieces at a time. I prefer to work on one type of piece because there's a rhythm
Huh.
to it. I always bounce around. There's several stations in the studio, and there's sort of like a design area, which is where I work more on smaller design items. Um, and then there's larger tables where I work on the bigger pieces. But yeah, I do tend to like to focus on one thing at a time.
So you said there is a rhythm. Like, do you listen to music, or this rhythm is more like in your head, like the pace of work that you feel how it's supposed to go and evolve?
I mean, I'll listen to music. Generally, it's jazz or um, bossa nova, or
Huh.
something just soothing or calming, or sometimes it's electronic, like ambient. Yeah, I mean, music, it doesn't play a big part in what I'm doing, but it just sort of is. It can be a lonely world in the studio. So it's nice to have something going other than your own thoughts.
That's true. I was about to ask actually, because I feel like as you know, much as exciting it is to be an artist and like create all of those fascinating things, it's also like pretty lonely because you're there every day, you know, by yourself in the studio unless there's a show, and then you're out in the world seeing people. So how does your like, do you have any sort of routine or some sort of like schedule that keeps you like somewhat inspired and on track with like creating things, or it's just comes, you know, more like improvisation for you?
I think, you know, most of my inspiration comes from the celestial world and the natural world. So whenever I'm able to go out into nature, I typically am inspired by something or um, learn about something like a natural event or a celestial event, then
Yeah.
usually taking inspiration from that, and then I can go and translate it. It's not such a direct. It's not like, you know, oh, I'll see a meteor shower and then I'll go and make a piece like a meteor shower. It's non-linear with how it works, and um I don't let I don't go out into these places hoping to find the inspiration. It just sort of it's almost like an impression, and then you'll go, oh yeah, like that was nice, or that made me feel this way.
Huh.
Um, but yeah, it's mainly natural events and
That,
and
that's
and things like that.
that's so beautiful. So basically, you're going for inspiration to like a nature, and so like you're like I think it's like orchid, like a huge orchid sculpture that you
Oh
recently.
yeah.
And I so loved that. I was like, should we expect like more flowers? Because I think it's such a beautiful, lively element that like enhance their overall like interior and just like brings people this connection for those probably also who's missing it with like our natural world.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very literal piece. It's sort of my first go at more impressionism and just taking something very literal. I garden a lot. That's something I'm very passionate about, is working with plants. Um, and I love orchids. They're very to me, they're the most interesting plant, because they're epiphytes. They can climb trees. They can put themselves in positions for better pollination. Their colors are so striking. They generally they exist in nature in very just green environments, jungles, and very wet environments. And so having this plant that is so bright and such a it's like you're looking around in this just sheet of green, and then you see these colors, and they're very difficult to pollinate. There's only um a few bugs or moths that can actually pollinate it. So the flower itself is trying to create its best version for the one specific insect that will pollinate it. So it's not like a flower that you see that bees come in and, oh, everything will pollinate it. It's like directing its beauty towards one specific um, bug.
Wow. That's so interesting. I had no idea that there's like so much that goes into, you know, just like maintaining the orchids and even like growing them. Do you have, because I was thinking now, you were saying that as a flower or any plant, they have a perfect environment that they exist in. Do you have this, I don't know, whether vision or just ideally where you see your pieces, like sculptures, when you create them, where you're like, okay, this is like a perfect environment for him, or like whoever it resonates with, you're like happy to, you know, expand their presence in their lives.
Right now I have the orchid out in my garden. Actually, I mount orchid. I go out to the beach and I find driftwood, and then I mount them on the wall, and I have the orchids mounted. So right now the giant orchid is with my orchid collection
Oh,
um, outside, and I really like it uh, living outside. I think it's right under a tree, and it works really well. I think in terms of the other work, the solar mirrors and things, I think there's sort of a misconception with uh, they're modern and they're very contemporary, but I think that they do best in a traditional setting,
oh,
um, in a more traditional home or Spanish architecture. Um, I think there are spaces that are very modern that have them, and it sort of complements the whole
yeah.
aesthetic of it. But I really enjoy it um, with sort of older architecture. I think it's a striking combination.
Oh, that's so interesting. Do you have like some crazy dream, or maybe just like a dream that you have in relation to your work, and where would you want to see it in, like, I don't know, many years, or just some sort of like, yeah,
I
like,
I think I think taking them outdoors would be a big step in sort of what I want to do. I think larger scale is
hmm,
something that I would really like to see. Specifically, yeah, outside. So the solar mirrors, that are 10 to 15 feet tall, and are outside interacting with nature itself. I
hmm,
think that's sort of the goal that I would really love to see. I would like to create a show that was purely tactile, so one that people were encouraged to interact physically with the art,
that's
because I
such
think that it's
an
also
idea.
something that you don't see
Don't
a lot or isn't encouraged. So um, somewhere down along the line, I'd like to.
Wow, I'd love that. I think it's such a refreshing idea, especially considering that you go to pretty much any, even like art opening, and then they're like always this like, thing that you cannot touch it, which I get. Like art is very special, but at the same time, I think it creates this new type of connection when you had a chance to interact with it and touch it and see how it feels and
Yeah.
that it's made of. And what do you, yeah.
Sorry.
No, no, I was curious. It was like a little off topic, but like, what are your thoughts on the contemporary art scene that is like happening right now? If yeah, what do you think about that?
Uh, I don't know. Um, I think there's a lot of great art being made. There's a lot of great artists my age. I think Los Angeles is sort of turning into a great place to make art. It's gaining more of a reputation like New York was in the '60s, and I think it's exciting. I know a few friends of mine, LJ Kim and Lachlan Turkson, are making some really great light based art. Um, Lachlan works more with water and vibrations and
Mhm.
also with light. And LJ works with dichroic glass and light, creating shapes and amazing color combinations. So there's some really exciting things. There's also some things that seem redundant, and
Yeah.
but just like any medium, there's good and there's bad.
Huh.
and
You,
and those are so subjective too, you know. I mean, I think it's nice to have a just a combination of everything, because some people like this, some people don't like this, you know. It's sort of not for me to say what's good or bad, really.
you're like beautifully kind artist in the sense that like I think like for a lot of people, I mean, including especially when you create something beautiful, you just go in the I don't know some of the art shows and you like what is that? Like, why is it happening? Why it's like we call it art. But I guess to your point, it's probably fair that everyone has like a different taste and preferences. So, um,
Yeah, you never know what somebody's going through, or what their mind is considers beautiful. So,
yeah,
you know,
that's,
there's something for everybody, but it's nice. LA, I think, is nice in that you have a a good mixture of different communities and different ideas of what that is.
yeah, that makes sense. And if you have like say unlimited funds, is there like an artwork or like a sculpture that you would love to get, whether from the artist who already passed away or from some of the contemporary artists?
I think, uh, like, the first thing that comes to mind is a Rothko.
Oh wow.
Um, I think that having a Rothko would really, because that was sort of, I remember going in at LACMA and seeing those in person when I was younger, and, it was the first time I think that I really felt that, uh, I had the feeling that abstract art could, um make you feel something, when I was younger, and just sort of the way that the colors vibrate almost on the canvas, and some of them even sort of pop out. It feels like, it's really, really special, I think. So, yeah, I
Yeah,
think I'd buy a Rothko. I think that would be.
good choice. I hope you will soon. And I was wondering, I guess you named already a few artists that like living contemporary artists whose art you enjoy, but if you could name like three overall, the ones who your work you like and find um fascinating.
Yeah, I think, Helen Pashkian, who's here, she was a light and space artist working with resin. She's located in Pasadena. Her work is really inspiring. I think, Laddie John Dill, who's also a LA-based artist working with neon and colors. Um, Fred Eversley, who's now in New York, um, works with urethane. Um, Mariko Mori, who's Japanese artist working with sort of celestial ideas and concepts and glass, and very soft and soothing. Um, I think Olafur Eliasson, um, is one of my favorite, just because he explores so much. He's such um, an explorer and so many different mediums, but it all just is so cohesive and works so well together as a collection. And um, yeah, let's see. I mean, there's so many.
Yeah.
Um,
That's that sounds like beautiful. I mean, I don't know some of them that you named, but Oliver Elias, and I was thinking about him because I think it's like a lot of like how do you say cross points between like when you reflect on the art and nature and how we feel about that. So that's is definitely a great one. And how about the galleries? Are those the ones that whose work you or curatorial work you enjoy and you think they stand out from others or?
I think Rhett Baruch Gallery, who I showed with recently, um, he's doing interesting things, in terms of just having almost a smorgasbord of different art and artists and, mediums, and just sort of taking risks with what they show and their locations. Uh, Oliver Cole, who I work with also in Miami,
Mhm.
um, they specify more in contemporary artwork, but also, we'll have Yves Kleins and Ai Weiwei's and things like that. Um, and yeah, and then there is the major galleries like Hauser and Wirth, who also just have great taste. There's a reason why they are who they are, and um, I recently went to one of their shows, and they had Larry Bell's work with John Chamberlain,
Mhm.
and that was really special. Um, I think William Turner is also a fantastic gallery. That's located out in Santa Monica on the west side. There's so many, and I think more and more are popping up in LA, and more of these larger galleries are expanding to LA because there's something happening here, I guess.
The scene is thriving. That's true. And how about your works? Like, where can we find them? Like in your studio, or do you have maybe like any shows that I can stop by and
Oliver Cole Gallery in Miami, and then out here I have some works at Rhett's showroom, and then yeah, my studio is I'm always open to having visitors and seeing sort of my own curation. But I think some of the pieces will be involved with Art Miami. Me and Lachlan and LJ are starting to come up with a concept for a group show, um, which is later down the line. We're sort of taking our time with it. Um,
that's the
and
best.
yeah,
I think it's yeah, I think it's so nice also when you can like stop by the studio or go to the art fair and enjoy it. Wow, that was so interesting. Thank you so much. I'm just like
thank
so
you.
thrilled.